So I'd like to talk a little bit about my trip to Kurdistan and share a few reflections 1 year from the referendum. So I was really keen to visit Kurdistan, having spent a number of years before I became an MP volunteering in London with victims of torture and some from the region. On arriving in Erbil, for those who have been, I'm sure you would have felt the same as me, I was shocked by the progressive and sophisticated surroundings. I was expecting a war zone, but the city could be mistaken for Dubai in its high-rise ambition and elegance. Sadly, war is not too far away. Half an hour's ride outside of the city, we were in a Syrian refugee camp near the border with the Kurdistan region. Chatting to families surrounded by playful children, I heard so many stories of pain and suffering, loved ones missing, presumed dead, people injured by mines, children made orphans by war. Most of those I spoke to had been there for more than 3 years, with no guarantee of when they would return home. They were weary and they were exhausted. All they wanted to do was to be reunited with their families and get back to their homes. Kurdistan, as I know that you know, is host to not just refugees from Syria, but 1.5 million people displaced by war from other parts of Iraq. Although refugees have special status in international law and are cared for by the UN, internally displaced people are the responsibility of the host government. Sadly, Baghdad seems to be doing little to help and leaves the task to Kurdistan, which is already suffering an economic tsunami thanks to the dramatic fall in oil prices, the hostility of Baghdad, which has cut its budget since 2014, and Kurdistan's own dysfunctional economy, which needs massive reform. As the Kurds and Iraqis move to liberate Mosul from the brutality of the self-styled Islamic State, more displaced people than ever before are heading into Kurdistan. The population has expanded by 1/3, which is the equivalent of the population of Birmingham moving to Scotland. Understandably, there are water shortages, electricity shortages, and schools and hospitals are overwhelmed. Travelling to the front line in Mosul, which I have to say is probably one of the most terrifying moments of my life, to talk to Peshmerga fighters and Iraqi special forces, we saw clearly the sacrifices made by these men and women. Over the border in Mosul province, we visited the Christian village of Bartella, which had been seized by the Iraqis after a brief firefight. ISIS didn't have time to destroy homes or set booby traps, but many houses were pockmarked by bullets, while some entirely destroyed by airstrikes. Later, visiting a local hospital, we saw soldiers suffering life-changing injuries, and I was deeply humbled to witness a female Peshmerga fighter passing away. We and the rest of the world owe them all so much. Another poignant visit was to a camp that was home to the Yazidis, who practice a pre-Islamic and pre-Christian religion. Many have been murdered as apisites, sold into sexual slavery between one ISIS emir and another across Iraq and Syria, or killed because they were too old to sell. Women survivors saw their men slaughtered before their eyes and even their babies killed for fun. Of the 5,000 Yazidi women abducted as spoils of war, 2,000 have escaped, but they must still endure daily nightmares and flashbacks, as my honourable friend we'll maybe be discussing, Sandy Martin, who is going to be joining us in the discussion. At the SEED project, which operates from a schoolhouse building, assiduous professionals were working carefully to help victims overcome such traumatic stress through counselling, gardening, knitting workshops. A couple of therapists had studied clinical psychology at Koya University, but that is the only course in the whole of Kurdistan. The country is in desperate need of people who understand post-traumatic stress. It must be our priority and the government's to offer that support alongside physical reconstruction and the political reform the country so desperately needs. To visit Iraqi Kurdistan was an absolutely fascinating opportunity. Yes, there are grave challenges in that part of the world, but where terror has done untold damage, a rose is growing through the cracks in the cement. Beauty and creativity is growing because of the passion and determination of the people. Not long after my visit was over, an independence referendum was held in Iraqi Kurdistan. I believe that referendum took place a year ago this week. And I don't need to tell you that the referendum was successful and peaceful. The people decided to back independence with 93% voting yes, with a turnout of over 70%. What could have been celebrated, a celebrated use of democratic power, quickly soured as Baghdad reacted. Baghdad moved to punish the Kurds for their decisions, closing the airports for 6 months, and the Iraqi army tried to invade the Kurdistan region. It's clear that Prime Minister Abadi attempted to use economical and physical violence to push the Kurdish people into a corner and overcome his own humiliation. Of course, we deeply regret the human cost of these actions, and we must be honest and say the reaction from the international community was not good enough. Your should-be allies in Europe allowed themselves to be distracted by other things like the referendum in Catalan, and that should shame us. But despite the difficult year, we should all be thankful that the Kurdish people have come through. Very recently, a strengthened Kurdish element will return to the Iraqi parliament. And I understand that after regional parliament elections, the bond between Kurdistan and the United Kingdom will continue to strengthen. So before I hand over to Karwan Jamal Tahir, I just want to send my solidarity to your cause. Thank you for your invitation. And if the people are united, self-determination will win out in the end. So if I'd just like to introduce Karwan, who's the Kurdistan Regional Government's High Representative to the UK. And his main role is building a relationship with parties in Britain, politically, economically, and culturally. And I'm really looking forward to what he has to say. Thank you.
Thank you.